Do you hate him? Because I kind of do. Sometimes I really like him, but other times I don't, which I think embodies the conflicting feelings I have in general whenever I see a teacher in the movies or read about one in a book. And so this is a little bit about those conflicting feelings. I recently read this book. In it, Welty describes the work her mother did teaching mountain children in a one-room schoolhouse. Welty's mother rode a horse to school. She crossed rivers. She recited poems from the McGuffey's readers out loud on her way to school and back. In a way, she reminded me of teachers I read about as a kid. In this book from 1871, one of our favorite little women, Jo, grows up to be a molder of men. She and her husband run Plumfield School for Boys. And in this Anne of Green Gables sequel from 1909, Anne becomes the teacher of the Avonlea School and discovers the delights and frustrations of working with young people. Around the same time, my partner was reading this book. The author writes that America in 1960 was a society that had trouble taking anyone without an economic role seriously. To raise their stature, women were given the morality franchise. Women were elevated as the moral guardians of their families. If women worked, she says, they worked low-paying jobs long defined as those for women: nurse, librarian, flight attendant, secretary, and teacher. If you were middle class with an intellectual bent, you gave back to the community by teaching school until you married and turned your attention to good works in the church and proper women's clubs. So basically, I thought, the teacher is a tough woman, but also motherly, almost like a nanny, like in this movie from 1959. Now, this confused me because this Rockwellian teacher is not the super teacher I knew. The super teacher I knew looked like this. She is not all that motherly.
And she's not super or motherly.
So how did things change? I wanted to find out. I remembered reading Plato's Allegory of the Cave in college, something about the quest for light in a world of shadow, how that was a metaphor for teaching and education, and thought about making that my starting point. But in typical fashion, went to Netflix instead. But even then, watching movies, I realized I had begun looking at how teachers are portrayed. The organization here is chronological and thematic. Most of the work was released in the last 50 or so years, and you'll see films and book covers repeated when they contain elements the same as other films and books.
And I'm your narrator. I teach high school in Washington State. We should pretend I look like Matthew Perry.
As you might expect, the teacher is new. Jonathan Kozol, for example, writes about his first year. Esme Cadell writes about her first year. And Dan Brown writes about his first year, as do lots of other people. Luann Johnson, who wrote the book that inspired Dangerous Minds, writes about her first 4 years. Maybe the teacher has recently left another profession. Jaime Escalante, the real teacher who inspired Stand and Deliver, leaves a high-paying job at an electronics corporation to teach in East LA. Or maybe the teacher cannot find other work. E.R. Braithwaite, the teacher who wrote the semi-autobiographical To Sir with Love and inspired the 1967 film, takes a teaching job in a poor area of London because he cannot find the engineering work he really wants to do. Maybe the teacher is wealthy or famous and got into teaching as an act of charity or as an experiment to test his skills. This A&E reality show shows the star of Taxi and Who's the Boss temporarily suspending his work as an actor and entertainer to teach English in Philadelphia. This GPS technology developer and billionaire and ex-candidate for the 2010 California gubernatorial election, leaves his entrepreneurial work to teach one section of American government for one semester at the school for which his book is named. This protagonist, who's fictional, comes from the NBA. Sometimes the shift has less to do with occupation or job than with geography. Ron Clark, the teacher who inspired that movie starring Matthew Perry, he comes from rural North Carolina to teach in Harlem. Gregory Mitchie, also from North Carolina, teaches in Chicago. He calls himself typical white bread Americana. These stories are origin stories or infancy narratives.
We want to know how the new one will fare and grow up. In order to grow, the teacher must first be eager to learn. The cover of this book by William Ayers shows a cartoon where, in one panel, a student sits in a desk and a teacher stands above him. Then, in the second panel, the teacher sits and the student stands. So before the reader opens the book, roles have been switched. The teacher is the primary pupil.
Sometimes this is established as early as the title, Educating Esme. Here it's in the subtitle, The Education of a Teacher and His Students. Same here, The Education of a Caretaker. To my students, Clark writes in the dedication, thank you for teaching me more about life than I could ever teach you. Somehow, the teacher seems to only teach one class, probably English, and if not English, then music. Dolores Van Cartier works with rebellious teens at St. Francis Academy, a school about to close. Mr. Holland, he takes a job as a music teacher to pay the rent while he composes music. In Music of the Heart, Roberta Demetris struggles as a new music teacher in East Harlem and finds her program threatened. In Take the Lead, Pierre Dulaine teaches classical dance to uncooperative students in an after-school detention program. In Hunky Dory, Minnie Driver plays a drama teacher working to stage a rock and roll version of Shakespeare's The Tempest. Escalante, bless his soul, teaches math. At some point, a combination of all these characteristics roll together and create our super teacher, an instructor with unusual energy and pizzazz. The archetype for this kind of teacher can be found in the real world, but is most overt in fiction, where magical teachers abound. In fiction, the magical teacher might be bald in miniature, like this one, or this one, or old and wise. However the teachers are physically described, their primary internal quality is the same, and their power should not be underestimated. Even the teacher who seems to be bad will show his good side in the end. Here's how we can describe our teacher so far. White, eager to learn, usually teaching English or music, and imbued with magic often found in fiction. He comes from a faraway place to work in a high minority school, and generally, the school is not very nice. The classroom is shabby, probably with a broken window, as is the case here and here. Sometimes there is not even a classroom. The teacher might have to teach math in a locker room, or media studies in a converted coat closet, or whole days of elementary school to homeless children who apparently do their assignments in a warehouse that has no name. Whatever the state of the environment, the classroom is where the story takes place. To me, that's interesting in itself because it's the inverse of many teen TV dramas where wealthy young people hang out in clothing stores and restaurants and go to bonfires on the beach, but don't really go to class. The students in the stories we're looking at seem to attend class every day. The rabble-rousing, slack-jawed students may act out, but they're almost always there. The first day goes like this. One or two kids with glasses, probably white, sit up front. Everyone else is in back. The student with the boombox on his shoulders wanders around. Everyone has significant challenges to face. Then a teacher walks in and sets a satchel or a briefcase on the desk. Escalante, he doesn't say anything. A student yells, "Let's put our desks in a circle and talk about our feelings." "Let's talk about sex," another adds. At which point Escalante establishes himself as a humorist in front of a graffiti-tagged blackboard. "If we talked about sex," he says, "I would have to assign sex as homework." Shoop, played by Mark Harmon in this fictional film, says, "Take your seats." A student picks up his desk and asks, "Where should we take them?" On McCourt's first day, a student throws a sandwich. I moved toward Petey and made my first teacher statement: "Stop throwing sandwiches." Yet McCourt knows it's not going to work, because what are you going to do with the teacher who tells you to stop throwing sandwiches when you already threw the sandwich? The magical teacher's response sets the tone. McCourt thinks for a minute and then picks the bologna sandwich off the floor and eats it. Johnson establishes herself by issuing a polite request in a firm voice. "Excuse me, young man. I would appreciate it very much if you would sit down." When the day ends, the teacher knows she must learn more effective ways of controlling her students and winning their trust. Johnson's solution is to tell the class, "I'm too young to retire and too mean to quit." In the movie version, she returns to class the next day and delivers a couple karate kicks in the air. That's how it all starts. In part 2, we'll look at the remainder of the year, including some pretty remarkable psychological breakdowns. It's not something you're going to want to miss.